So what are your views about capitalism?
So capitalism, my views on capitalism are complex. Capitalism was an improvement compared to feudalism, when we had kings and that. And then capitalism was good for taking us from there and creating the technology, making it so that we could make more stuff. But now, essentially, capitalism has outlived its usefulness, right? Capitalism is not a sustainable system. There's always economic crises. There's always recessions. Now we have a system where the top 1% controls most of the wealth, and then you have the people who actually do the work can't even afford to, pay their rent or, pay for food for their kids, right? Capitalism is not a good system now. It's not a good system anymore. It's outlived its usefulness and it needs to be replaced with socialism. Socialism being more sustainable, being more fair. It takes the technology that capitalism developed and it uses that technology to actually better humanity, right? And make sure that everybody has all of their basic needs met.
I kind of agree with you some parts. I mean, I agree that people exploit capitalism, to make themselves really, really rich. I don't agree with that area of it, but if it wasn't for capitalism, there are things such as, there have been so much advances in technology, in ideas, companies like, dare I say Apple, Facebook, although Facebook has exploited privacy and stuff like that, the freedom of expression it has created for people nowadays, without that, we wouldn't have had movements such as Black Lives Matter, stuff like that. What would you say to that?
Well, I'd say that first of all, Facebook is not freedom of expression, not really, right? Facebook, at the moment, it's controlled by a private company, right? And that private company has a board of directors. That board of directors controls what can and can't go on Facebook. When you do their privacy policies and the terms and conditions, they can basically just change that to say, oh, you're not allowed to post this, that, whenever they think it's useful. If the shareholders of Facebook decided that Black Lives Matter was getting too radical, no more Black Lives Matter on Facebook. Simple as. For example, we tried to advertise something for Palestine and it got rejected. It got rejected because they said, oh, it's political and it's controversial, and it got rejected, right, on Instagram, which is owned by Meta, right? It's not freedom of expression because at the end of the day, it's a private company that is controlling what can and can't go on there. If a private company decides, okay, we don't want left-wing stuff in there, no more left-wing stuff. The private company decides we don't want conservative stuff in there.
But there has to be some sense of moderation, though. There has to be some kind of moderation when it comes to views. Obviously, freedom of expression is important, but you can't just say anything. So
yeah, exactly. But why should a private company control that?
Because they created it. They created the software. Why can't
that be democratically controlled?
Why shouldn't they? If they're the one that created it, why shouldn't they control it?
Well, because first of all, I think the better way to think about it is, first of all, they didn't create it by themselves, first of all. The technology that they used to create it, a lot of that was public stuff. Stuff in computers, that's
open
public.
Source.
The internet is public. A lot of stuff that they use, right, that these companies use, is open source. It's people just
they're utilising things that are already open source, that already...
Like, even Google, right? Google was made on a university computer, right? And what was contributed to it was in universities. The World Wide Web itself, right? What Facebook is built on wasn't made by a private company for profit. It was made by researchers because they needed a way to be able to find all of their research easily. So no private company creates something from scratch. It's always using stuff that it's always benefited from infrastructure that society has given.
I agree. They obviously utilize certain things. They take advantage of human resources. I think is the most important thing, because before you were saying about exploiting people, and when it comes to people making themselves really rich off the backs of other people, that I don't agree with. I think there should be some kind of regulation where the government controls the amount of wealth an individual or a company can accumulate. But for me personally, capitalism, I think, is something that's helped me. If it wasn't, I wouldn't really suit a 9-to-5 job whereby I'm employed by the government. Certain things don't allow me to work with, my personality, things like that. I can't maybe get a typical 9-to-5 job. capitalism, being your own boss, for me, it's helped loads of people. I mean, why would you say that's a bad thing?
Well, because the thing is, first of all, most people in capitalism aren't their own boss, right? When people say, oh, you're being your own boss, you're probably thinking a small business. But really, those businesses isn't really what capitalism is built off of, right? Capitalism creates those big corporations that accumulate so much wealth. And no regulation will stop that. At the end of the day, who is it, right, that pays for the political campaigns of politicians? Who is it that funds these politicians' political campaigns? Who is it whose kids go to the same private schools as the politicians, right? Like Rupert Murdoch, right, for example, David Cameron went to his wedding, right? Went to his daughter's wedding. And then what happened? David Cameron then said, Rupert Murdoch's company can now buy Sky, right? That is what happened, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if you say, we want
I think is completely wrong.
We want regulation and stuff like that. But the thing is,
kind of stuff,
capitalism, because of how capitalism works, it means that wealth will be concentrated, and then the state comes to protect that wealth. That is what the capitalist state is there for.
I think for me, it's not necessarily the game itself, it's not the players. I think it's the game. Don't change the game. I think it's the players. These are people taking advantage of capitalism. People like David Cameron, politicians and dodgy politicians and stuff like that. But if capitalism was left on its own, just to work on its own device without interference, it creates a free market, free competition. The government should intervene when there's stuff that is anti-competitive. They should get involved. Obviously, they don't. I mean, socialism is basically the government controlling everything. I agree with certain parts of socialism. Individuals shouldn't get so wealthy that they're so rich that that we see in the world now. And I think things like taxes and stuff like that can combat that. But for the government to control everything, the government can't be held to account like a private individual can, like a private company can. If something goes wrong, the government can't really be held to account. It takes very long. I mean, what would you say to that? How would you change that if you would?
Well, there's a few things that we have to clear up as well. First of all, when you say free market, free competition, that will always lead to monopoly. In a free market, there are winners and losers. So what happens is, the winner will be the person who's the most ruthless, that is exploiting their workers the most, right? And then they will win. What happens? They'll buy the assets of the loser. They'll be able to get more credit. They'll be able to reinvest more. Then they'll grow into a monopoly. Like, we had free market capitalism in the 1800s, right? What happened was, right, a few people, right, got rich from slavery, right? And then other industries began to come up because, from spinning stuff from cotton, all that sort of stuff. Then they had free competition. What happened? It turned into monopoly. That's what happens.
But that's because bodies like the CMA, don't intervene when they should do. That's because they let companies get too big. But if, for example, right, you're a regulator, right? Yeah. And this happens all the time. You're a regulator. It's called regulatory capture. This isn't even just a socialist thing. This is a typical, just economic thing. Regulatory capture. What happens is, the regulators who are meant to be regulating the company, right, when they finish their job at the regulation place, they get a cushy job at the company they were just regulating. That happens all the time. That happened in that's one of the reasons why we had the 2008 financial crisis, right? Because they were basically just giving them high ratings, giving their CDOs high ratings when they shouldn't have, right? That's basically what happened. Yeah, so the point on monopolies, in the Industrial Revolution, when Britain was industrializing, they weren't really monopolies. They actually broke up the old monopolies that were formed from plantations and slavery, right? Then they broke that up so that they could industrialize and start doing their own thing. What happened? They eventually became monopolies themselves, right? And then what did they then have to do? Then, because, they needed to reinvest more capital, they needed more places to sell their stuff, they decided, okay, well, we're going to colonize Africa. We're going to colonize all of these different places, right? And then we will force capitalism on them. They will be forced to buy our stuff, and we can take their resources for cheap or for free. It's a tough one.
To continue accumulating, right? So that's the thing. Capitalism started off as not monopoly, like industrial capitalism. Started off as not monopoly. It became monopoly. and then it became monopoly.
And
then
what
it
do you
had
say to
become
like
imperialism.
people? If you follow socialism and governments can't be held to account like a private company can.
So I'll say
What do you
two
say?
things. First of all, a private company can't be held to account. Put it this way: if Meta like bans you, there's nothing you can do.
Yeah, but I'm not just talking about that. I'm
Yeah.
talking about things like simple things like compensation. So if I was to have like an injury now at Meta or whatever,
Yeah.
it's a very quick process. I can claim for compensation. With the government, it's slightly more complicated. Things like,
So I'd
it's
say
hard.
I'd say two things, right? So stuff like compensation. First of all, the only reason companies have to compensate you anything is because of laws put in by the government, right? That's the only reason why, right? If it wasn't for working class people agitating and protesting and rioting and shit like that, right? Companies wouldn't have to compensate you fuck all, like they wouldn't. The only reason why a company can be held to account a tiny bit is because the government was forced, right, to put in laws to protect you and
look at
workers
stuff
and
like,
customers.
for example, let me give you an example. You've heard about the Windrush scandal, right?
Yep.
Things like that. Even now, look how long it's taken for people to get.
Yeah, exactly. But
No
that's
one's been held to account yet, and even that's still dragging on.
Yeah, but that's a capitalist government, right? That's a capitalist government. The government, right, as you're imagining it now, right, as you're seeing it now, it's a capitalist government. It's a government that is for capitalists. Like I said, they get lobbied by the capitalists. Their kids go to the same schools. They get bribed by the capitalists. Their job, right, is to make sure that business conditions...
Working for the Murdochs and all that.
Yeah, their job is to make sure that business conditions are good for the capitalists. That is their job, right? And if you get aggro about it, then the police will come and they'll break your bones and chuck you in the cell, right? If you don't want to leave your house because your landlord evicts you, the police will come, they'll beat you up, you go to prison, right? That is what a capitalist government does. A socialist government is accountable to the workers, the working class. We don't control. Yes, we don't control, right, a government.
I mean, give me an example of a socialist government. Is it China or
Cuba, for example?
Cuba.
Yeah, Cuba is a really good example, right? You can't, like when an election happens in Cuba, you can't lobby, right? You can't run a campaign. Nobody can bribe you. All that happens is the person who's running for election in the neighborhood just puts up a poster. It says who they are and why they're running, and then that's it, right? There's none of this. There's no campaigns funded by some next up media company.
We'll have to carry this on. We'll have to continue this.
I mean?
Yeah, this is a very, very good conversation, and it's been a pleasure talking with you. I think for the next episode we will definitely continue this. It's a tough one. I definitely agree with a lot of what you're saying, but good to speak with you again and catch up with you. Yeah. And thanks guys for listening. And go for it.
This is I'm from Fight Racism Fight Imperialism, the revolutionary communist group. Look us up, get our paper, and if you like what I've been saying here, then contact us and get involved.
What you guys are doing are really, really good. You're like one of the few organizations that are standing up for for people that need it, basically. So I appreciate what you guys are doing. Definitely going to keep following you guys.